The most important truth to anchor this topic is that avoidant attachment does not automatically mean cheating, and it does not excuse betrayal. Cheating is a choice, a pattern, a decision made repeatedly. But in some avoidant-leaning people, the way they manage fear of closeness can create behaviors that look like emotional, multi-connection living, where they keep several doors slightly open so they never feel fully exposed inside one room. That's not a justification. It's a psychological map that helps you understand what you might be seeing, so you don't confuse confusion with commitment, and don't confuse theory with trust. Avoidant partners often struggle with the weight of deep intimacy, not because they can't feel love, but because closeness can trigger their internal alarm system. As intimacy grows, so does the feeling of responsibility, vulnerability, and the risk of being seen too deeply. For an avoidant nervous system, that can feel like losing control. So instead of leaning into the discomfort of growth, some people look for a workaround. They seek the benefits of affection without the full emotional exposure required to sustain one honest bond. This is where you may see secret texting, lingering ex-attachment, flirtatious friendships, or situationships that never truly ended. The pattern can be subtle. It often hides under harmless labels like just a friend, we're only checking in, or you're overthinking. But the real issue is not the label. The real issue is the function of the behavior. Keeping multiple partners or options in orbit can act like emotional insurance. If one relationship starts to demand real consistency, emotional presence, or repair, the avoidant-leaning partner doesn't have to face the full discomfort. They can soothe their anxiety by knowing there's another source of validation available. This makes them feel less trapped, less dependent, less naked emotionally. Again, this is not maturity. It's avoidance dressed up as autonomy. Another layer is ego regulation. Avoidance can appear self-sufficient externally, but many still need to feel wanted, admired, or desired. When insecure attachment meets modern access, the temptation is easy. A message here, a reaction there, a soft reopen of an old romantic door. Just enough to feel chosen without having to do the deep work of emotional accountability. The result is a hidden web of attention that keeps the avoidant feeling emotional fed while the primary partner slowly feels emotionally unsafe. This is why secrecy matters more than excuses. A person can have a healthy friendship with an ex if it's transparent, respectful, and mutually agreed upon. But when the connection is hidden, minimized, or defensively protected, it crosses into a different category. The avoidant may not call it cheating. They may not even consciously frame it as betrayal. But if your relationship is being quietly weakened by private emotional alternatives, the impact is the same. Trust deteriorates while one partner is expected to tolerate confusion as proof of love. And this is where you must be careful with your empathy. Understanding attachment theory can help you recognize patterns, but it can also become a trap if you use it to rationalize disrespect. A lot of loving people stay too long because they think they're avoidant, so this is just how they cope, or if I love them more securely, they'll stop needing external validation. But attachment style explains tendencies. It does not negate responsibility. You are not required to absorb betrayal just because someone has an emotional wound. The healthiest way to approach this is not to diagnose them but to define your standards. You don't have to prove whether a specific message counts as cheating in a courtroom sense. You only need to ask whether the behavior protects your bond or silently threatens it. If a partner needs secrecy to maintain a connection that looks romantic, emotionally intimate, or flirtatious, that is a major red flag. If they flip the blame onto you for asking a fair question, that is another red flag. If they insist their freedom requires your discomfort, that is not love. That is self-prioritization without relational care. So yes, some avoidant-leaning people keep multiple partners in the background because one true, mutually accountable bond feels too exposing. But the correct response is not to compete harder, chase clearer, or shrink your needs. The correct response is to elevate your standard of emotional safety. You can offer compassion without offering unlimited access. You can understand their fears without living inside the consequences of their secrecy. And if they want to be in a real relationship with you, the price of that closeness is simple and non-negotiable: transparency, boundary, with romantic alternatives, and consistent behavior that proves you are not sharing a relationship with hidden options. Some avoidant-leaning partners secretly keep in touch with multiple romantic or semi-romantic connections, not because they are incapable of love, but because they are trying to manage fear of closeness without doing the harder work of secure commitment. The pattern often functions like emotional insurance. As a relationship moves from excitement into real intimacy where consistency, accountability, and emotional presence are required, an avoidant nervous system can feel exposed. They may want love, but they also fear the weight of being fully known, fully needed, and fully responsible. So instead of meeting the discomfort with growth, some try to reduce the risk by keeping backup connections nearby. The unspoken logic becomes, if this gets too intense, I won't be trapped. If I feel overwhelmed, I can soothe myself elsewhere. If I feel insecure, I can confirm I'm still wanted. From the outside, this can look like harmless texting with an ex, late night check-ins with a former situationship, flirtatious friendships that never quite became platonic, or secret online chats that they downplay as nothing serious. The label doesn't matter as much as the purpose. If the contact exists to soothe insecurity, maintain a sense of control, or preserve a backup option, then it is not neutral. It becomes an emotional alternative. And emotional alternatives quietly destabilize trust even when there's no physical cheating. Because trust isn't only broken by bodies, it's broken when your relationship is asked to share emotional space with hidden possibilities. This pattern can also be a form of ego regulation. Avoidants, often present as independent and self-contained, but that doesn't always mean they are emotionally self-sufficient. Some still crave reassurance that they are desired, wanted, and not easily replaced. Multiple connections provide a low-risk way to get that validation. They can feel chosen without having to be deeply known. They can receive admiration without sitting in vulnerability. They can get the dopamine of attention without the discomfort of real accountability. And when the primary relationship starts asking for deeper emotional maturity, the temptation to slip into a lighter, easier connection can grow. You may notice something important here. The secret contact often intensifies when the primary relationship requires maturity. After you ask for clarity, after a conflict, after you express a need that demands consistency. Instead of leaning in and learning how to repair, they may reach outward. The secondary connection becomes a pressure valve. It offers relief from responsibility. It gives them a place where expectations are lighter and their image is still polished. This is not always a calculated betrayal. Sometimes it is a reflexive coping move. But reflexive harm is still harm. That's why this is not just an attachment style issue. It's a boundary and integrity issue. Attachment theory can explain why someone feels overwhelmed by closeness, but it does not excuse secrecy that erodes your emotional safety. Many avoidant people choose loyalty and transparency. So when someone uses avoidance as a shield for hidden alternatives, the real problem is not their fear. The real problem is that they are prioritizing their comfort over the trust you need to feel secure. For you, the danger is getting trapped in the logic of endless understanding. You might think, if I'm patient enough, they'll stop needing outside validation. If I'm soft enough, they'll feel safe enough to commit. But the truth is, your softness cannot replace their personal responsibility. Your empathy cannot be the substitute for their boundaries. And your nervous system should not be the price of their unfinished healing. The healthiest way to respond is not to compete with invisible rivals or become a full-time detective. The healthiest way is to define the structure you require to stay. You don't have to argue over whether a single message qualifies as cheating. You can say, I'm not okay with hidden contact that carries romantic energy. I need transparency. I need clear boundaries with past or potential partners. I need behavior that protects this relationship, not secret assurances that protect your fear. Then watch what happens. A partner who is capable of real commitment won't shame you for asking for clarity. They won't call you insecure when you are requesting basic respect. They won't protect access to options more fiercely than they protect your sense of safety. They will understand that trust is a system built on honesty and consistent behavior. If they respond with defensiveness, secrecy, or shifting stories, believe the pattern. Because love cannot be safe when you have to share your place with shadow connections you are not allowed to see. Some avoidant-leaning partners keep quiet connections with multiple people because it feeds a very specific emotional need, ego regulation. That phrase sounds clinical, but the experience is simple. It means they use external attention to stabilize how they feel about themselves, especially when intimacy starts to feel heavy, demanding, or too real. They might look independent on the outside, but inside they can still be sensitive to feeling unwanted, powerless, or emotionally exposed. So instead of facing that discomfort directly, They unconsciously reach for a shortcut that restores confidence without requiring deep vulnerability. This is where the pattern gets misunderstood. You might assume that an avoidant who keeps an ex or a flirtatious friend nearby is doing it because they don't love you. But love and behavior don't always align. When someone is relying on avoidant coping, they can care about you and still seek the emotional quick fix of being desired elsewhere. Not because you're lacking, but because the attention gives them a fast hit of reassurance when their internal world is unsettled. It's not mature love. It's emotional soothing through low-risk validation. Ego regulation through multiple connections can look like small things that add up. A casual checking in text that feels unnecessary. A hidden DM thread. A friendship with an exact romantic vibe they'd never be comfortable with you having. A habit of keeping old romantic links warm like coals that never fully go out. The "I'm just being friendly" defense often collapses when you look at the deeper function. Is this connection harmless, transparent, and respectful of your relationship? Or is it private and protective of a fantasy that says, I still have options, I still have power, I'm still wanted? For many avoidants, being wanted can feel safer than being known. Being wanted offers a clean identity boost. Being known requires emotional exposure. That's why this pattern can intensify right when the relationship enters a deeper stage, when you ask for consistency, when you ask for emotional presence, when you want clarity, responsibility, or repair. Those requests are healthy, but they can trigger an avoidance fear of obligation or loss of control. So instead of leaning in and strengthening the bond, some people unconsciously reach outward to reclaim a sense of lightness and power. The outside attention becomes a pressure valve. It helps them feel less vulnerable to you, less dependent on the relationship, less responsible for the emotional weight that real commitment requires. This doesn't mean they are malicious masterminds. Many are not. But the impact can still be deeply painful because it subtly turns you into the one who must compete with invisible alternatives. Even if no one says it out loud, you start sensing that your relationship isn't protected with full devotion. You feel the unease of something half hidden. You notice that when you ask normal questions, they get defensive, and instead of reassuring you, they accuse you of being insecure. That's a classic sign that the issue isn't your sensitivity. The issue is the system of secrecy they want to keep intact. Ego regulation also creates a dangerous illusion for them. It can make them feel emotionally steady while they're actually avoiding growth. They get the comfort of being desired without the discipline of being accountable. They receive affection without deep repair. They maintain control over their identity without fully honoring the relationship they're in. Over time, this can weaken their ability to build secure bonds because they are training themselves to self-soothe through external attention rather than internal emotional skill. For you, the biggest risk is using empathy as a reason to tolerate the intolerable. You might understand their attachment style and still be destabilized by their secrecy. Both things can be true. A person's fear of closeness can be real, and your need for emotional safety can be non-negotiable. Attachment theory explains patterns, but it doesn't erase boundaries. It's not your job to absorb the cost of someone else's self-regulation strategy, especially when that strategy quietly undermines trust. This is why the healthiest response is not to argue terminology. You don't have to win a debate about whether their behavior counts as cheating. You can anchor it in something simpler and more powerful. Does this behavior protect our relationship or quietly destabilize it? If the connection with others requires secrecy, defensiveness, or minimization, then the relationship is already being harmed. Trust is a living system. It can't thrive in the presence of hidden romantic oxygen tanks. Ego-driven backup contact is not cured by you becoming more perfect, more patient, or less needy. It's cured by clear standards and truthful behavior. The moment you say calmly that transparency and respectful boundaries with romantic alternative are required for you to stay, you shift the dynamic out of confusion and into reality. If they respond with maturity, accountability, and consistent change, that's a real signal. If they respond with blame, evasion, or rage, that's also a real signal. Either way, your self-respect protects you from being trapped in a relationship where your emotional safety is asked to coexist with private options that exist to feed someone else's fragile sense of power. One deep bond requires emotional exposure, and that is exactly what an avoidant, leaning person often feels least prepared to tolerate for long. When someone is truly committing to one relationship, they are stepping into a space where their patterns will be seen, their inconsistencies will be felt, and their emotional blind spots will eventually be named. A single deep bond doesn't allow you to hide behind charm forever. It doesn't let you disappear without impact. It doesn't let you relabel emotional avoidance and independence when the other person is sitting there with real needs, real feelings, and real expectations of mutual care. That level of accountability can feel terrifying to someone who has learned to survive intimacy by controlling distance. So some avoidant-leaning partners unconsciously create a system that gives them the benefits of connection while keeping their vulnerability under tight management. They don't always mean to do it as a strategy. It can be an emotional reflex. If being deeply known feels unsafe, they diversify the emotional risk. Multiple shallow connections are easier to manage because no single person is close enough to hold a mirror to their full emotional reality. No single person has enough access to say, "This inconsistency is hurting me," in a way that the avoidant can't dismiss. And in that sense, these extra connections become less about love and more about emotional control. Control is the hidden currency here. With one deep partner, you have to face the intimacy economy of real life, repair, responsibility, vulnerability, time, consistency. But with multiple low-depth connections, you can manage your identity more carefully. You can be the charming version of yourself in one place, the mysterious version in another, the healing version in another, and you never have to fully integrate into one honest, accountable self. That fragmentation can feel safer to an avoidance system because it reduces the risk of being emotionally cornered by truth. This is why you may notice that these secret or semi-secret lines of contact increase when intimacy inside the primary relationship grows, when you ask for clarity, when you want consistency, when you name a pattern, when you request emotional presence that requires them to stretch. Those moments are not dangerous requests. They are healthy requests, but to an avoidant nervous system, they may feel like exposure. So instead of leaning in and learning how to be accountable, some people reach outward to regulate their sense of autonomy and power. The secondary connection becomes an escape hatch that says, "I'm not trapped. I still have space. I still have options. I can breathe." This is also why these people often minimize the significance of the side contacts. Because if they admit the emotional function, they have to admit the emotional cost. They might say, "It's harmless, you're overreacting, we're just friends," or "You're being insecure." But the issue usually isn't the existence of other humans in their life. The issue is secrecy, defensiveness, and the emotional energy that is being quietly invested elsewhere while your relationship is being asked to survive on partial honesty. Multiple shallow bonds also allow them to avoid the most vulnerable role in love, being the one who is fully accountable for someone's heart. In a deep relationship, your actions have weight. Your silence has consequences. Your inconsistency isn't just a mood. It becomes a wound. But when you spread your emotional energy thinly across several connections, you can avoid ever having to be fully responsible for one person's emotional safety. You can disappear from one connection and reappear in another with less consequence. You can keep the image of being free while still receiving the comfort of being wanted. That's not commitment. That's emotional consumption disguised as independence. For you, the partner on the receiving end of this pattern, this can feel like a slow erosion of trust rather than one dramatic betrayal. You might sense that your relationship isn't fully protected. You might feel the instability of competing with invisible alternatives. You might notice that when you ask simple questions, you get defensiveness instead of reassurance. You might feel your nervous system tighten, not because you're paranoid, but because your body is reacting to a reality that hasn't been spoken aloud. When love is safe, transparency is natural. When love is shaky, secrecy becomes an ability someone fights to protect. This is why it's crucial to separate compassion from permission. You can understand that avoidant patterns often come from fear of closeness. But fear of closeness does not give someone a free pass to maintain secret emotional options. Attachment style may explain the discomfort. It does not excuse the dishonesty. And your standards should never be lowered to accommodate someone else's unresolved coping. The healthiest frame is simple and powerful. You're not asking them to have no life, no friends, no past. You are asking them to respect the present relationship. You are asking for clear boundaries with romantic alternatives. You are asking for transparency that protects trust. You are asking for the kind of integrity that makes your nervous system feel safe in love. And if someone responds as if that's unreasonable, the truth becomes clearer than any argument, because the problem is rarely your boundary. The problem is that your boundary threatens a system of control they've been relying on to avoid true emotional accountability. Some avoidant-leaning partners get pulled into cheating or maintaining multiple almost relationships because they become addicted to novelty and allergic to depth. Not in a cartoon villain way, more in a nervous system way. The early stage of connection feels light, exciting, low risk. There are fewer expectations, fewer emotional responsibilities, fewer chances to feel exposed. You get the dopamine of being wanted without the weight of being fully known. For someone with avoidant wiring, that can feel like the perfect emotional deal. In the beginning, everything is easier to control. You can be charming without being accountable. You can be romantic without being consistent. You can be present in bursts without facing the long-term reality of repair, daily emotional availability, or deep vulnerability. The early stage is a stage where you can feel powerful without feeling trapped. And that is seductive to someone who subconsciously believes closeness eventually turns into pressure. As a relationship grows healthy roots, the emotional economy changes. Love stops being a performance and starts becoming a practice. You can't rely on chemistry alone. You have to communicate when tension appears. You have to tolerate uncomfortable emotions instead of disappearing. You have to reassure your partner without acting like their needs are a burden. You have to choose consistency even on days when intimacy feels heavy. That is mature love. But for an avoidant-leaning person who hasn't done that internal work, this stage can trigger the old alarm. I'm losing freedom. I'm being depended on. I might fail. I might be seen too deeply. So what happens when depth starts asking them to grow? Some lean in and heal. Some shut down. And some distract themselves with novelty. This is where the danger begins. Novelty becomes a coping strategy. It offers a quick emotional reset. When the primary relationship feels complex, confronting, or emotionally demanding, a new person feels simple. The emotional stakes are lower. The identity boost is immediate, the attention is effortless, and because there is no long history yet, they don't have to face the consequences of their inconsistency. They can stay in the version of themselves that feels safest, the exciting one, not the accountable one. This is why some avoidant-leaning people are not serial cheaters in the loud, obvious way. Instead, they become quiet boundary breakers. They maintain flirtations. They keep old situationships warm. They're emotionally available in a way they aren't with you. They protect the secrecy by minimizing it. It's nothing. We're just friends. You're overthinking. But the real issue isn't just the messages. The real issue is that these connections are being used as an escape from emotional depth. A relationship that is growing into real commitment requires emotional courage. It requires you to be the same person in calm and in conflict. It requires you to tolerate intimacy when it stops being exciting and starts being real. And that's where novelty becomes a trap, because it allows someone to avoid the exact discomfort that would mature them. Instead of learning repair, they chase the fresh spark. Instead of facing vulnerability, they seek attention elsewhere. Instead of evolving through the natural friction of real love, they outrun it. The heartbreaking part is how this impacts the partner who is trying sincerely. You may start to feel something you can't fully name, a slow destabilization, a sense that your relationship is not being protected. You might feel like you're competing with invisible energy. You notice that the moment you ask for deeper consistency, they become vague. The moment you bring up emotional safety, they get defensive. The moment the relationship needs adult-level honesty, they suddenly seem overwhelmed. And sometimes they are, but overwhelmed does not justify secrecy. This is also why you must resist the temptation to become easier to keep them. If you shrink your needs to reduce their fear, you accidentally tease the relationship. That depth can only exist if you silence yourself. You become the one adapting to their immaturity, and then novelty becomes even more attractive to them because real love is no longer asking them to rise. So the right solution is not paranoia, and it's not policing. It's clarity. You focus on behavior, not labels. You don't need a courtroom-level argument about whether something technically counts as cheating. You ask a more powerful question: does this behavior protect our bond or quietly undermine it? Because a healthy partner doesn't need secret attention to stay emotionally regulated. A healthy partner doesn't need options to tolerate closeness. A healthy partner doesn't treat your request for loyalty like a threat to their identity. When someone is ready for depth, they don't fear it. They respect it. They don't chase novelty to escape responsibility. They learn how to stay emotionally present when it's uncomfortable. They build trust through transparency. They understand that long-term love is not a constant high. It's a disciplined tenderness that shows up in everyday life. And if an avoidant-leaning partner cannot do that, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop turning your heart into a training ground for someone who keeps choosing the adrenaline of newness over the integrity of real commitment. The sixth keynote can be this core truth. The real issue isn't that an avoidant has a past or talks to people. It's the combination of weak boundaries and secrecy. Because secrecy is what turns friendship into emotional risk for your relationship. You can't build safety with someone who needs private romantic oxygen to feel okay. And you can't heal an avoidant pattern if the relationship is quietly competing with hidden alternatives. A healthy partner can absolutely have friends, colleagues, even respectful contact with an ex in some situations. Adults have histories. Real life isn't a clean room lab. But healthy contact has three clear qualities. It is transparent, it is appropriate, and it is mutually respectful of the relationship. If you know about it, if it's not flirtatious, if there's no emotional intimacy that crosses the line, and if your partner doesn't protect that connection more fiercely than they protect your peace, then you're not dealing with a threat. You're dealing with adulthood. But when the same contact becomes hidden, minimized, or defensively protected, that's when the ground shifts, because secrecy is not neutral. Secrecy has a purpose. The purpose is usually to keep access to something your partner knows would threaten trust if fully visible. That's why the argument "you're just insecure" is often a cover for "I don't want to give up this supply." And in avoidant-leaning dynamics, the supply isn't always physical. It can be emotional insurance, ego regulation, a backup plan, or a pressure valve that helps them avoid the vulnerability required to fully commit to one safe bond. This is why you should stop getting trapped in technical debate about whether something counts as cheating. People exhaust their energy trying to prove the label, while the real damage is happening inside their nervous system. The better question is simpler and more powerful. Does this behavior protect the relationship or quietly destabilize it? If your partner is investing private emotional energy into someone who feels like an alternative, then even if they swear nothing is happening, your relationship is already being undercut. Because trust doesn't die only when bodies collide. Trust dies when honesty becomes selective. You can also notice the double standard test. If they would be uncomfortable with you having the same kind of secret or flirtatious contact, but they demand freedom to keep it for themselves, then the issue is not friendship. The issue is control. Avoidant-leaning people sometimes frame this as independence, but true independence doesn't require secrecy. True independence can coexist with transparency. If they truly believe a connection is harmless, they shouldn't panic when it's visible. Another major sign is emotional defensiveness instead of reassurance. Secure partners respond to concern by creating safety. They may say, "I understand why that would worry you. Here's what it is, here's the boundary, and I want you to feel secure with me." Avoidant-leaning partners who are protecting a hidden emotional option often do the opposite. They shift blame. They label your concern as insecurity. They turn your request for clarity into a conflict you must apologize for. That move is not proof that you're too much. It's often proof that your question is touching a truth they don't want to face. Your job is not to police every message. Your job is to establish a clean standard of relational integrity. You can communicate it calmly. You're not banning them from the world. You're asking for boundaries that honor the relationship. You can say you are not okay with secret contact that has romantic history, flirtatious energy, or emotional intimacy that belongs inside your relationship, not outside it. You can ask for transparency that removes confusion, not arguments that increase it. Then you watch behavior. Do they become more open without resentment? Do they create clear and respectful limits with past or potential partners? Do they choose your safety without making you feel guilty for needing it? Or do they protect the side connection more fiercely than they protect your peace? Because that answer tells you everything. This is where your self-respect becomes protective. You don't need to prove betrayal in court to decide what you will tolerate in your heart. If the pattern requires secrecy, if it repeatedly triggers your anxiety, if it makes you feel like you're sharing your relationship with a shadow you're not allowed to name, then the relationship is not emotionally safe in its current form. And the deepest truth is this: a partner who is ready for real love does not need secret options to feel stable. They don't need hidden validation to regulate their worth. They don't maintain romantic backup doors while asking you to act like the front door is secure. Healthy love is not paranoia-proof, because you never question anything. Healthy love is paranoia-proof because transparency is normal and trust is protected proactively, not after damage is done. So the line isn't never talk to anyone. The line is integrity. If they want a real relationship with you, they must behave like your bond is something they are actively protecting, not something you are required to tolerate alongside private emotional alternatives.